Welcome back. It's Arlene Smith, Healing the Hearts of Healthcare. And boy, am I excited to be co-hosting with my guest, who is a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And you will love the story of how we met. So this is Rashida Cartwright, and she is actually a fellow podcaster of this amazing piece of work called Autism for Badass Moms. And I love it. I knew from the second that I met you that we were going to have this sort of connection.
It's so interesting, like how we met. But yes,
Right?
yes, there was a connection. We just started talking. I just started sharing everything about me.
And me too,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
And then we talked a little bit, and which is why she's here today, because of her background is so important in this whole process of healing the hearts of our healthcare workers. We talked about COVID, and we talked about the challenges and all the suffering, right? So before we get started, Rashida, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. So, my name is Rashida Cartwright. I am a licensed clinical drug and alcohol counselor in the state of New Jersey. I'm also a mental health therapist. I've been working in the mental health and substance field since 2005, so it's been a long time. And in just various arenas. Worked in residentials, inpatients, psychiatric emergency room. I'm also a certified psychiatric screener. And so during COVID, we saw definitely a lot, and we went through a lot mentally as well. So I'm a mom, as you said. I'm a badass mom. Got 4 kids under the belt, and I run a drug treatment program currently for a nonprofit.
That's amazing. So I will tell you, I know in previous podcasts, we've really focused on, what the pain and the suffering was like. Really as a caregiver, because, we were wired to care, just like you're wired to care, right? It's part of our DNA. It's who we are. It's why we're not working on Wall Street, right? We're here. We're working with people that have a specific need. So why don't you share with the audience what it was like for you from that sort of spectrum of mental health services during the pandemic? What was some of the things that you saw kind of coming up your way?
So, again, I work for a nonprofit, and I worked in a psychiatric emergency room. And I was working 16 hours during the weekend, every weekend during COVID. And it was very scary.
Yeah.
Very scary, because in a psychiatric emergency room, you just don't know who's coming through the door, what mental health condition that they're presenting with. And the challenge was, with regards to masks, sometimes due to their mental health condition, there was paranoia. They wouldn't wear the mask. And so a lot of the workers, the nurses, the psychiatrists, the flow of individuals coming in with mental health struggles, because of the isolation, there was a lot of burnout, a lot of compassion fatigue was going on. Oh my gosh, this person's here again. And you just hear that like a running tape.
Right.
And then people just not coming to work, or deciding I'm not doing this anymore, I'm going to retire, which then put a lot of pressure on the other individuals that were currently in the trenches.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was definitely, and just to be able to provide space for these individuals. We were having kids come in who never attempted suicide before, never came in the ER for some kind of medical condition, and they were coming in like clockwork.
Yeah.
And it was very, very depressing, that I could say that.
Yeah. And so you can see how these experiences sort of shape who we are as human beings, right? They and for people like us, where caring and compassionate care is so important. It's sort of like the facet of what we do, right? It lays on our heart. I describe it in earlier podcasts. It felt like COVID, what it did was it just peeled away these layers of my heart one by one.
Yes.
And then I was left with this place that I call the great sadness, right? Where it was really hard for me to just even imagine, how do I laugh again, get joy again, enjoy things again? Did you saw the same?
Oh, I absolutely saw the same. I mean, how could you find happiness in all the death that was happening?
Yeah.
I actually lost my father during COVID.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So there was just a lot of pain happening during that time. And you have to process so many different things, the losses in your family, the vicarious trauma that we were experiencing as healthcare workers, hearing other people's story and pain. It took a lot I'm personally out of myself.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I feel like I went into, I want to call it sort of my COVID cocoon a bit. I started pulling myself off of social media because it was like, getting me a little bit agitated and angry because I was, like you, right, putting in these long shifts, right, working back to back, getting no sleep. And, I'm seeing people baking and like, having time to explore hobbies, right? And they're on their new Pelotons and I'm like, I'm crying and I'm thinking, I haven't eaten all day because I didn't want to take this mask off, right?
Right. Or, for 16 hours, I wore a mask.
Yeah.
16 hours.
Same.
Couldn't breathe, face sweating. Scared to take my mask off even when I went to the bathroom.
Me too. Yeah.
It was just, and then what do I do when I get home? Because I have kids. So I'm
Right.
like, and that was that fear of like, I'm putting myself at risk. Am I going to expose my family?
Same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. So it reminds me of sort of that saying, physician, heal thyself, right? It's this idea that as caregivers, we are designed to care for other people, but with that comes a responsibility that we have to care for ourselves as well.
That's right.
And so we often forget that. And it reminds me of like the hundreds of times I've flown an airplane because I did a lot of travel in my past experience working in leadership and speaking around the country as well. When you see that, your flight attendant and she's up there and she's explaining how we put the mask on ourselves before we put it on small children.
Right.
And for some people, they would think, well, why would you do that? And of course it is, right? You're no good to anybody if you can't breathe.
Absolutely.
Right? So what's your poor kid going to do? Your kid's alive, but you're not going to be able to help them, right? So we have to put that mask on ourselves. And I think we struggle with in healthcare is, the work is extremely challenging, right? The conditions are demanding that we work under. It's very long hours. And like you spoke very beautifully at the beginning, this unpredictability, like you honestly don't know. Like every day you go into work, there were times when I would just pray and I was just, please, just let today be a day I can handle. Right? Because it was so unpredictable.
And again, the predictability of like, again, who was coming in.
Right.
I'm on guard. I'm like hyper vigilant because I just want to make it through my shift and not get hurt.
Exactly.
Right. So I have that piece. And then I have the piece of like this unseen entity that could kill me, a person coughing. And I've had situations, unfortunately, during COVID in the emergency room where I was spit in the face.
Right.
I've had to come in close contact and restrain an individual who was a risk to themselves. And so all these layers of unpredictability just really definitely just weighed on me so heavily. But I didn't process it. Right. Like it was just kind of like you went in, you did what you had to do, and you go home and hey kids, and then you do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can easily see how somebody could get to a point because they don't have any self-care that they get close to burnout. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so that's the whole purpose of sort of this podcast is to connect people back to let's remember like why you were designed and how you were made and what your purpose is, right? And let's make sure that you're connecting yourself to your purpose and you can understand what that really, really looks like.
Right.
And despite everything that's going on around you, you still have some time to fit in sort of that self-care piece. And I don't need to tell you this, and I know you know this because we talked about this in the hall when we first met, right? We live in this crazy world where it's like, sometimes I look at it and I think, am I in a real world where human beings are really acting like this? Everybody's wick is super short and people are responding in a way that's beyond levels of inappropriateness, right? In my world, I'm like, how could that be, right? But I think that's what we see, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of increase in reactivity. My frustration level has been like a little lower. Sorry, kids.
Right. I know. I say the same to my husband. I'm like, I always preface that, right? And I say, I just want to apologize up front, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's part and parcel of the world that we live in. But I think one of the opportunities for us as caregivers is to really look at that lens of, you know what? We don't know somebody's burden and struggle. We don't know what people are carrying around in this world, and we don't know how that's going to impact our interaction with them. Right? My sort of frustration and huff or gruff or grunt or whatever it might be could be all that somebody needs to set them off, right?
Yeah. And again, I mean, we all, like you said, we all come with, who knows? I mean, I could have just had a fight with my husband.
Exactly.
And then, I'm going to Dunkin' Donuts to get my regular coffee, and the lady forgets to put, a shot of whatever I need, right? And that could have been the
could have been it.
explosion right there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so to be mindful of that it's just, we just don't live in a world on our own. It's other people and their experiences.
Yeah. And I did talk about that in an earlier podcast, this idea that our energy travels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can really see that. I'm sure you see that a lot in the work that you do.
Yeah, definitely. And trying to, with regards to people's energy and the clients that they come in with their own energy, right? Like, and we have other staff that we work with and our supervisors that come with their own energy, and trying to not to allow that to enter.
Right.
Like, I try to not allow that to enter myself,
Block
but sometimes it's hard.
It is.
It's like, why is she acting that way? Like, what is her problem? Instead of just like, you know what, maybe it's something with her, right? I don't have to own her, that energy or that space, and I'm gonna keep my space.
Right. I'm going to keep it safe
Yes.
and secure.
Yes.
And contained.
Yes.
I always try to imagine, we can't change the fact that, somebody can be yelling or screaming at us and we're stuck in that situation. But we absolutely have control over how we handle it.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think as healthcare workers, because we're moving at such a fast pace sometimes, I feel like that's the piece that often slips when it does, right? We get to that point where we're like, whoopsie, shouldn't have said that, or maybe shouldn't have responded that way. And I think that's just like the armor that we wear, and then it's like a chink in that armor, and it happens, right?
Yeah. And it's like knowing when you're activated, right?
Right.
Because, again, sometimes it could just be someone looking at me and I'm just like, oh. Right? Like, and then my body just reacts to it and it's on the defense. Like,
Right.
so, and then I interpret my interpretation, which is truly wrong.
Right.
They don't like me. Right. They have a problem with me. And so being able to catch ourselves in that moment and ground ourselves and say, like, okay, like, what's going on here? And my faulty thinking may be really faulty right now.
Right.
Let me take a step back.
Take a step back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that because, as a nurse educator, one of the areas that I have educated a lot on, and I support long-term care, so it's it's a different sector of the healthcare, but I love it, and I've done the hospital side as well. But just educating people on this concept of trauma-informed care and just being aware that there are so many people that are walking this earth that have had something happen to them in their past, right?
Absolutely.
And it was a traumatic event. And you think of all of these people as we age, right, that never sought any therapy or any care, right?
Right.
And they're just holding all that inside, all the effects of the trauma, without doing anything. So I know when I educate people, I remind them of the importance of, like, you're interviewing people, talking about it, creating that safe space where we just talk about those triggers, or what are those things that really do set somebody off so that they re-experience that trauma all over again. And it just naturally lands me to what we all went through in COVID.
Right. And I think also it is just an awareness of you, because there is a lot of people out there who have never been in counseling, or hesitant about counseling and what that would mean, or scared to be able to open up stuff, old wounds, and not sure if they're going to be being able to handle what comes next. And so when you have that insight into yourself about and an awareness of, hey, this, whatever's happening right now, I could be activated from something previously, and just how that could change how you go about the situation.
Right.
It could be, I work with a lot of women who experience trauma, and they'll say something like, hey, this guy entered the store and I just had this feeling, and I didn't like him, and I don't know why I didn't like him, and it just made me so angry. And so when we would process more, it was the tone. The tone was just like their father, who was abusive towards them.
Yeah, 100%. I always use that example of, I came from sort of that background where my father was, he was military, right? And, he had sort of a way of working. And so, sometimes as a leader, early on in my leadership journey, I had to catch myself and notice and identify, like, certain team members or certain peers when they were coming to me, right? I would have to almost say like, all right, you're not 13 and this isn't your father, right?
Yes, yes.
Right? And so it was
yes.
like almost like the nose on your face. You had to kind of look at it in that lens. Otherwise, very quickly, you would not realize that you were triggered.
Right.
Right. And so I do think that, we could do more to like, I almost feel like we need to do more to just sort of normalize the importance of therapy for everybody, right?
I agree. And I think, when I look at it from a cultural standpoint, and I know for myself, it was just like, well, what is wrong with you that you need therapy?
Right.
That your pastor can't fix, right? And how we labeled other individuals in our culture. So if someone may have had a diagnosis of like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, it would be like, oh, he's stressed. He's not feeling well. Or, oh, that's how he acts. Instead of giving it the name.
Right.
So that we can do something about this.
100%.
Yeah, so, it is very important to be able to just be able to identify the symptoms and...
Yeah, I would agree. So, one of the things that I know when I look back in my COVID journal, actually it was my journal of all the time I worked in senior living. But, for that period of time where it was around COVID, I see this sort of central theme that I noticed a lot. And again, very similar to you, very long hours, those 16 hours, terrified to eat or drink. Or I remember sitting in my car and thinking, all right, I'm going to take everything off and I'm going to eat this food if I can. And then you'd have to go through the putting everything back on. And so there was a really long period during that COVID where, I found myself coming home and being fully vulnerable here. Like I found myself coming home and no surprise, I would, stop at like, to go get something to eat on the way home at like 12 a.m., right? I'd have this gigantic meal. I drink like maybe 3/4 of a bottle of wine just to kind of find a way to just process all of that, right? And so, and then when you look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, right? This is not good in terms of self-care, right? And so just working on a plan to like say, all right, that's not the way to go. But I recognize in healthcare, I think just because the work we do, and like you said, it's so unpredictable and people are being hit from every single possible angle.
Yes.
So we have a lot of people, I think, that struggle with how do I get to that point where I can give myself care or I can come out from that dark place.
Right.
What advice would you give people that are really kind of sitting there where they're just not 100% sure, like, how do I actually take a step forward to make change in myself?
So I just want to kind of go back to, when you were, sharing about, leaving work and having this meal
and
the wine, like many of us did,
Yes.
And it just kind of triggered a thought and an emotion in me that I remember. So my what was destructive for me was I would just continue to keep busy. So I would get home and I'm like, oh, there's like things everywhere and let me clean this. And it's like 2 a.m.
Right.
Clean this. And just I would stay in that go mode.
Oh.
And I never stopped because if I stopped, then I'd have to think about like what's really happening. Like oh my God, I could have died.
Right.
Each time that I went to the hospital or whatever the case may be. And with regards to like self-care and the struggle with that, I think it starts with remembering that self-care, is not about being selfish. I think there's this kind of thing of like, oh, if I take care of my needs and I'm not taking care of the needs of my husband or taking care of my needs of the kids and all these other obligations, but it's self-preservation.
Right.
And so that identification of, this is what it is and being able to make it work for you.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this kind of like, we have this thought, we have to go to a spa, or we have to do these grand things, when it could be just sitting in the car, because I like to rock out. And
Me
like,
too.
I'm listening to some music here.
Drive in.
Suspect music.
Yep.
And, but that gets me out of the space of what just happened. Mm-hmm. And so finding your self-care place. however small it may be. It may mean, you know what, I've actually been doing for myself that wake up early kind of thing.
Yeah, me too.
They say if you don't they talk about millionaires? Like if you wake up early, like that's what they do. So I was just like, oh, I'm gonna wake up early and I'm gonna be a millionaire. Yeah. And so, but waking up early gives me peace because it's quiet.
It's quiet in the house. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you, in my destructive behavior of just keeping busy, there were things that I was missing out on, like the sunrise.
Right.
Like my kids and my husband have seen this all the time, and I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, does this happen? Like, what is so?
Yeah.
Missing out on life and just being able to slow it down is so key and so important because you'll miss out on so much.
Yeah, and I think as healthcare workers, that's something that is just going to have to be, again, like this notion of I'm going to look at this like it's like the nose on my face, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be everywhere I go, this need of like taking that step back, really looking at from a higher level. I always use the analogy, I'm not a tall girl. I must have in a past life been like a giant and complained about my height all the time.
Oh, I love that.
So, in this round, I'm a little bit shorter. But, I love how when I can get on like a step stool ladder and I go up like 3 steps, the world just looks so much different. And I say to my husband all the time, I'm like, this is what 6 foot looks like. I mean, this is amazing. It looks totally different than what I'm seeing, right? And so that's always my reminder of like when we slow down, when we take that step back and we look at it really from that step up lens, we see the world sort of differently.
Right.
And we need to do that as healthcare workers because, like you said, we're moving at the speed of light.
Right.
And one of the things that worries me all the time, because believe me, I've talked to hundreds of healthcare workers, that every time we start this conversation talking about the great sadness of COVID, like people get like they well up, right? They get that crack in their voice.
Yes.
They could because it's so visceral to them,
Absolutely.
right? And it evokes such a strong emotion that I feel like we get to this place and it's like, how can we get to a place of safety where people feel like, you know what, I'm not going to allow that anymore. Right. I'm going to look at that and reframe it in a different way.
Absolutely. And I when we had met, you're so chill. So when we had met and we were having the conversation and I was just, sharing about, everything, that I was feeling, I did feel myself like, oh my God, I feel like I was going to be on the point of tears because I buried it.
Right.
Like, I always looked at myself as a soldier, like you just do it, you go through it and that's it.
Right.
But when we started talking about it, it brought that up. And so I realized that I haven't processed that.
Yeah.
I haven't processed it.
Yeah, and it's like everything in this world. Pain and suffering is not new to us as human beings. It's been around since, the dawn of day, right? We've all gone through pain and suffering. But I do think this sense of grief and loss, and just like owning and acknowledging these are the things that we all experienced and creating a safe place to be able to just say, you know what, it happened. The good silver lining of the whole thing is that my skills, my talents, my convictions, and the way I saw the world, that never died during that, and I pushed forward and made sure that I was providing care in the best way that I could humanly do.
Absolutely.
Which was not easy.
Not at all.
Yeah, I talk about it all the time. I feel like, I was such an experienced nurse because I had done so much nursing in my career and tried just about every type of nursing other than ICU. Never was an ICU girl.
Okay.
But I ended my career, I was in oncology, I was in renal, I was in orthopedic, step-down trauma, ER. Like I did a whole bunch of different types of nursing, even a little travel nursing. But I still struggle sometimes with the feelings of how I felt so inadequate in those stages of COVID, of just like, how do I care now for these residents in these communities? And fortunately for me, I was in a very small community. We kept COVID out for the longest time. So, when we did get it, we were able to contain it. But it's still that idea of like, now when, a few more people got it, then it was like, now what do I do? How do you do what you do? Because it was so unique and different, right? With all the PPE and the gowning up and the gowning down and the pressure from all that. Right. So I do think there's some healing there that's probably needed in just this idea of, even though we feel like we can handle everything in terms of skill and skill development, it's just a reassurance sometimes that like, things can happen and change that, right? And we are all at a place and vulnerable enough to maybe not be skilled at times or not be able to handle it.
Yeah, and because it's a lot, right? And during COVID, it was a lot. It put in the ER, it put all my skills into play, and there was errors that I had made because of the overwhelm and just wanting just to get out of there. So it is important to just basically be able to, like you said, take that step back and be able to forgive yourself, because I think forgiveness is like a key point. Forgiving myself for, again, errors that I may have made during that period of time in multiple arenas of my life. I think that's a biggie for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think forgiving ourselves is absolutely 100% necessary. It's probably one of the earliest steps I think we all need to do in order to really advance and say that we're going to leave things behind. Because if we're holding on to any of that energy and those emotions or those feelings that trigger us, I mean, I know I'm guilty of it. I still have episodes where sometimes I'll be like shopping in the supermarket and then all of a sudden like a wave of like a memory will flood in.
Yes.
Something just makes it come in. And I'm like, oh, it stops me like dead in my tracks. And then I'm like, all right, just take a minute, like breathe through, like take your time. It's going to be okay. But it's amazing how our brains work.
And that it could, again, bring you back to, you
It
feel like,
evokes it.
yeah, like that you're right there again.
Right there again.
Right there again.
Yeah. It's so terrifying. So, for those healthcare workers that might be thinking, it's really hard for me to find that joy and happiness and fulfillment in the work that I do. Like I tend to lean more towards like sadness and depression. What advice would you give sort of as a mental health professional to say, you got this, you can do this, and this is how you might want to look at this, a little differently?
Well, it's okay to be sad. The acknowledgement of your feelings is important. The type of work that we do is heavy work.
Yeah.
Like we are creating we're providing the space for someone to share things that they've never shared before, their deepest, darkest secrets, and to be vulnerable, right? Even though we have our stuff that we also bring into the workforce. And so just being compassionate, having that self-compassion, we're so hard on ourselves, getting that self-compassion, being able to utilize, I think, supports is important, because sometimes I feel like, in our field, we think we could do everything and manage, I got this. But sometimes it's okay to be like, you know what, I need help.
I agree.
I need help.
I agree. And the other thing that I see a lot in healthcare, and I don't know if I necessarily see this from peer to peer, but I see this as a healthcare worker, is there are so many people out there that haven't done a good job dealing with anger issues and frustration.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, because of that, the spillover that happens to, anybody sort of in that range is tremendous.
Yeah.
And everybody feels that energy so quickly. So, I think even like getting healthcare workers to the point of like really self-recognizing that, you know what? Something is happening in this situation that I just am not aware of. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. I certainly can't control that. And I'm not going to like let that clickbait me and get caught in a circular loop where now I'm angry and I'm frustrated.
Right.
So I call it a little bit of shielding.
Okay.
Where it's like, or I've heard people call it as like an energy block, where you intentionally sort of create that space where those emotions don't pass through to you. But I mean, that must be something you see a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. Anger is an emotion. It's a very strong emotion. And so being able, like you said, to really step back, because we're quick to react, because our body physically is telling us like, this is a threat, we're in danger. And so just being able to look at our thoughts, look outside of those thoughts, challenge those thoughts too, because sometimes, we may think something and it may not even be true. But my body's telling me that I'm angry and upset. But maybe if we calm your nervous system down and we do some breathing, you're able to look at it from a different lens instead of just, oh my gosh, like, how come you didn't take the garbage out today?
Right.
It's been sitting there for I don't even know, 5 hours. Meanwhile, maybe my spouse had just got a phone call, that a friend of his passed away, and I'm just ready on attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always use the example, speaking of husbands, because, I'm like a control freak with the dishwasher and the way it all should be organized to maximize the space and get everything to fit in. But I will never forget during therapy, my therapist saying to me many, many years ago, like, why is that so important if your husband does it differently? Like, why is that a big, right? And so I really had to think about that, right? And it was like, okay. Because you can't get everything in? I mean, that to me is very important, right? You want to get everything in, right?
Right.
She was like, so what? If it doesn't get in, again, this idea of so what, right? So I think the more we can embrace this idea of like, so what? Like if that's what we're living with, it's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Because we make these things like mountains.
Right.
Like it's getting done. It may not be getting done the way we want it to get done.
Right.
But in the reality is it's getting done. And is it worth all that energy to get upset about and, and to build up a fight and argument? Is it worth it?
100%.
Because it's getting done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think about when I was an oncology nurse, like I asked an oncologist, what piece of advice would you give, a new nurse in oncology? And he said, you always leave the patient with some sense of hope, right? I can't explain this enough. The power of hope is tremendous.
Yeah.
But he said, but the other thing that I never want you to forget is that stress causes cancer. And I have always remembered, like this idea that, internally within our bodies, I always try to picture like when we're raging or when there's like all that emotion happening, all these firing of cells is happening right internally, and how we can maybe through meditation or quiet reflection or just finding that safe space where we can like allow ourselves just to be still for a short period of time.
Right.
And that is so hard to do in our day and age with technology.
Oh yeah, everything's busy, busy, busy. Go, go, go.
Yeah. You can't, I mean, if you take, people are not even just like enjoying like that moment of just like sitting and still.
Let me tell you something. It's so interesting because one of my coworkers, she's losing 2 of her days because there's only a certain amount of days that you could take over.
Right.
And I was like, oh gosh, you should have took those days. And she was just like, why? Because what's going to happen is I'm going to take those 2 days and then I'm going to come back to more work. So I'd rather just not deal with that and just continue to work.
Right.
Like what are we doing here?
Right.
Like what is happening where we can't just take the time that we need to rejuvenate, to fall in love with the job that we, are
100%,
with, right? Like it's just, I don't know. It's
well, and I jokingly said this when I was a young girl, I remember watching the Jetsons and being like, oh, I can't wait for the future and everything's going to be so easy. And Rosie's going to I'm not going to have to work. I'll probably have to work 3 hours a day.
Oh, my
and I
goodness.
feel like, honestly, from a person that's been working since I was 11, babysitting, I started off and had jobs in fast food, and I volunteered in a nursing home when I was 14. But I've been working for a long time, and I feel like when I look back at my history of my work, I'm like, I'm doing more now than I ever did.
right.
Right? And so I'm like waiting for that sort of moment, that aha moment where people say, no, wait, we're going to step back again. We're going to step up. We're going to look at this from a different lens.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think we get caught in this idea of we are just moving so fast, and that's the energy our body is used to.
Yes. And then when we're decide to take that day off or that week off, our body doesn't go
Know
right
what
into
to do.
Yeah, it doesn't go right into vacay mode. It's like I should be doing something. Right? It takes me 3 days to finally figure I'm on vacation.
Me too. I'm like, wait a minute. I could be folding towels. I could be cleaning the window. I mean, my mind's always going.
Yes,
I'm right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think this whole idea of self-care and really getting down to that point of healing our hearts, we have to think about mental health as that is so critically important.
Absolutely.
We are not good to anybody as a caregiver if we're sort of like on the edge or functioning on the edge. So what advice would you give to people that are really sort of at that place where, that might be their reality?
Well, I think you would need to definitely revisit what you are. Look at what you're doing right now. Like what is taking up a lot of your energy, and is that something that needs to be there and in place? Because sometimes when we take a step back and look at like, well, I'm most of my day is at work, and then I come home and I go to sleep. Where's the balance in that? You're not watching. Like how can we put more of the things that you love and you enjoy and your passions in there, because again, you're going to feel resentment and frustration and anger and all these emotions if you're not doing things that make you happy and doing for yourself. We're so used to doing for others, but I think we need to come back to like, but what are those things I can do for me on a regular basis and schedule it out. We schedule everything else, like schedule it out.
Schedule it out and don't be embarrassed about it, right?
Right.
I feel like, I talked about this in an earlier podcast, I feel like as a working mom, sometimes, I'm like, I have to give myself permission, right? To do this, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, it's a trap, right? We work really hard, right? And so I don't need permission. I'm going to be a better mom. I'm going to be a better partner. I'm going to be a better friend, right? If I'm doing these things that are going to bring me joy.
Right.
And I do think like this idea of like taking that step back, really looking at really carefully, we can't understate the importance of that.
It's not until something happens to you, right? Because I actually had like a medical emergency. I was doing too much, and then I ended up in the hospital and stuff. It's not until something like halts you that you really realize like, oh, wow, like all these things I was doing, constantly being busy, is what led me to this place.
Right.
Right. And so being able to each day take an inventory. What did I do today that I loved?
Right.
Right. What did I do today that I loved, that I immersed myself in, and I wouldn't mind doing it again? If you can't find that in your day, then we need to think about sitting down and working on a plan for that.
I agree. And you said, you jam out to music. I'm the same, right? So like I can go from like, just waking up and needing a lot of coffee and barely like making movement to get me in the car for 15 minutes, let me rock out.
Yes.
I mean, I don't care what I look like. I mean, someday somebody's going to catch me on YouTube and they're going to be like, check out this girl who really thinks she is making the moves in the car.
And you'll become a star on TikTok.
That's okay. I'm good with that, right? But this idea of like that energy, man, when it just flows through you, right? And so for me, that's like a daily practice that helps me just like arrive at work and be in a state where like I'm good to go, I'm ready to go, my energy's up. I'm not like worried about other things, right?
Yes.
Some people that might look different. That could be classical music. It could just be like quiet drive. Like we don't know what it is, but you'll figure that out, and that's part of the journey. But going to work and coming home from work, you need to build in some type of a routine or a pattern where your energy's coming up and then you're decompensating coming down, and you're letting some of that stuff just brush off of you.
Yeah, and if you're a healthcare worker, right, like sometimes we, come off our shift or whatever the case may be, and then we go right into the house, like into our second job. But maybe it may mean like sitting in your car for a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? What's the harm in that?
Right.
I mean, the kids are, somebody cook them some food. But like, right? Like just this 10 minutes I'm going to take to myself to just kind of like ground myself before I go into my next job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of that. I know there was a point in my career in leadership where I did a lot of practice for Six Sigma and Lean, and I did a lot of Lean methodology and teaching and facilitating. And one of the principles of Lean that I love, and I've never forgotten it, is over-specification. And so many times we over-specify. Like, we really think that this has to be done, like me in the dishwasher, right? Has to be done this way, because if it's not good enough, right? And so we have to catch ourselves in that trap of, like, are we over-specifying? Are we taking it to a level that it really just doesn't need to be? And if we just loosen that up a little bit, would that give us the freedom to kind of just be like, good enough to do what we feel like would
I
bring
think
us
so.
joy,
Yeah, I really think so.
right?
Yeah.
I
But then
agree.
that means that, you got to give up a little control, though. Like, you have to.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't mind doing that, right? As long as it gets done, it
Yes,
doesn't
it gets
matter.
done,
But
yes.
I do also think the other thing that I don't want to lose sight of is, in our day and age, it's very easy to get distracted with our devices and very, very quickly. I see it even with my children where we have
Yeah.
constant conversations about like just not getting pulled into something. And then you're like, oh my God, 2 hours went by and I sat watching YouTube,
Yeah.
right? Or TikTok or whatever.
Right.
So I do think thinking about like your time as a commodity and making sure that you're carving out, like you said, just a little bit for you every day.
Right. Because, and again, you think about it, like for some, social media is a self-care kind of thing, but really, is it
Right.
looking at what's happening with other people? Like, is it helping you?
Right.
Right. Some people are like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at such and such, they're on an island somewhere and stuff. But you seem down. Like, you seem, is that really helping you right now? So we need to take a look at that. Like, maybe and if you're unable to take a break from that, right, then I don't know. I was thinking there's like a little addiction there, right? Like,
Right.
oh, you can't let go of that. You're shaking right now. Like, what is happening here? But maybe there's something else. Maybe there's getting back to reading books, right? I always say, whatever you used to do, like when someone says like, oh, I used to go to the beach all the time, or I used to fly kites and stuff. I think that's what you need to start working on, doing that again.
Yes.
Right? Getting back to the
Childlike state.
Yes.
The things that brought you joy. And I'm a big believer that we need to, as healthcare workers, find those moments where we can experience joy and happiness in the work we do.
Yes.
We are healing people every single day through our words, through our touch, through the way we provide care. Like, we're healers. And so we sometimes forget the importance of just like stepping back for a minute and putting that healing energy on ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right.
It's hard sometimes.
It sure is.
It is hard sometimes. And again, with society being as busy as it is, and it's the go, 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 and everything's rush, 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 it's hard to just be able to, sit back, relax, and, just be in the moment.
Yeah.
But if we could be in the moment.
How beautiful it would be.
I always say, right, if you're in the moment, like, you're not anxious, because that's, when you're thinking too far into the future, that's anxiety living there.
Right.
If I think far back, when I was 6, 7, and 8, well, that's depression,
Right.
The only safe place is like now. So we got to remember that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we have to remember is nobody knows you better than you, right? Mm-hmm. You've been living in this body your whole life, right?
Yes.
And so we do have to like take that time. I'm a big believer in journaling. I'm a big believer in writing things down, pen to paper, getting your feelings out is a great way to do that. Is just to own it, acknowledge it, not be afraid of it, and be brave a little bit about that journey, because boy, we all need it, right?
Yes.
Because the work we do is really hard, and it's necessary. So that's another factor. But, we want to make sure that people have a chance to keep their hearts whole and their healing.
And I love what you said about hope. I remember hearing someone say that hope stands for hold on, pain ends.
Oh, I love
Right.
that.
And if you know that, it's like almost like, night will never stay night. The sun is going to come out, right?
Right.
Like, so if you recognize that maybe I'm dealing with a lot of stress and frustration and pain right now, but it will come to an end.
Yeah.
It will.
Yeah, and you have to have that hope that it will. And if you're really struggling, again, reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to a licensed therapist for support, or even a support group.
Yes.
I've often thought times about creating sort of a support group around Healing the Hearts, because I
That
just
would be
feel
amazing.
like there are so many of us that have all of this heavy burden, and we weren't. In my world, I feel like we weren't tasked with carrying this burden for the rest of our lives, right? It was a very short period of time for a very specific purpose, and it's like it's time to sort of like let that cloak off and just start enjoying life and recognizing that we did something and it was well done, right?
Right.
And we met what we needed to do.
Absolutely. It is very therapeutic to be able to talk to someone else and just kind of just ventilate, like get all that out, because it's not meant to stay inside, because what happens is all that anger and frustration will come out, and we call it displaced anger, right?
Right.
We're on the wrong person.
Right.
Right? The squirrel was on the road today, and I was just like, get out of the way, you squirrel. It could be the squirrel lived. But we have to just be mindful that, and just take inventory of ourselves and, remember that we are human and we deserve to be happy.
We sure do, because we care for people.
Yeah.
And there's nobody that deserves happiness more than when you give your life in service of another person.
Oh, yes.
Right?
It feels good.
It feels
It feels so good.
So let's not forget that. Rashida, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today
my gosh.
as a co-host.
Oh my! You're like a rock star to me. So
Get out of here.
I want to thank you. I appreciate all that you do, and the healing that's going to come from this show is going to be so powerful.
Yeah.
Because again, it wasn't until I met you that I recognized that I've stored up some things that I do need to process. And so I'm very appreciative of you and having me on the show.
Oh, it's great. And I always believe there's, nothing in life is by chance.
Yes.
Like it's all directed,
yes,
right?
yes.
So you and I meeting, it was supposed to be, it was in the book, right?
I know.
And so I'm sure we will continue on, and I will
Absolutely.
continue to have you to talk about even deeper topics that I think we need to talk about with healthcare, especially around addiction. I am just so passionate about this. She'll be joining us on another podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great. And if you don't hear it enough, again, I just want to remind you, thank you for all you do in the care for other people. And I hope you join us again on our future podcast, and take care of yourself and take care of one another. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.